Good morning, Professor Kagan.
Morning.
How are you today? What's the weather in Germany?
Good morning. I'm great. For me, it's easy, but I hope you're all great, and you hope you had well, I can't say peaceful, but a calm night. And I'm very, very pleased that we can actually do these kind of meetings online. And I'm really honored to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion today.
Thank you. We have a very major start this morning with Professor Belardo, with Professor Kagan, with Dr. Karim, and I hope as well the discussion will be very interesting. And we will start with Professor Katia Belardo, who is Professor Emeritus in Obstetrics and Fetal Medicine in Amsterdam University Medical Center and University Medical Center Groningen. We know Professor Belardo very well. She is a former president of ISOC and honorary lecture prize winner in ISOC. She is an expert on ultrasound and invasive prenatal diagnosis. I would say she doesn't need any presentation, and she's one of the few people in the world who are policymakers, who are changing the way we work every day, and I'm looking forward to hear her lecture. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. It is for me a great pleasure to kick off this day with my talk, and I'm very grateful to the organization for the invitation. My talk will deal with strategies for first trimester ultrasound screenings in the era of cell-free fetal DNA. What we know is that early in pregnancy, there are two elements we are dealing with. On the one hand, we have the structure of the fetus, and we know that the fetus is growing very fast at this stage, almost doubling the size every week. And on the other hand, we have the genetic aspect that also determines, obviously, the development. If we start by discussing the genetic aspect, we had for many years the combined test as a best screening for trisomies, and recently cell-free fetal DNA has, in some countries, as we will see later, completely replaced the previous test. And if we look at the performance of cell-free fetal DNA in this systematic evidence-based review of the literature, in general risk pregnancies, and this is published in Genetics in Medicine in 2022, we see that the sensitivity for the common trisomy, monosomy X, and other sexual chromosomal anomalies is good, being above 98%. The specificity is also equally good, even better, I would say. And if we look at the positive predictive value, we see that this is extremely good in trisomy 21 and far less in the other condition, being as low as 30% in monosomy X, meaning that the chance that a positive NIPT test is confirmed by an invasive procedure is not that high all along the line of the condition, is especially high in case of trisomy 21. In this interesting paper, we look at the current use of non-invasive prenatal testing in Europe, Australia, and the USA. And what we see is that there are three major models. The red countries do not have a national offer, and the test obviously takes place, but in an uncoordinated way. And then we have the yellow countries, where NIPT is offered as a second tier test to pregnancies that have a increased risk at the combined test. So the combined test is still there, and the NIPT is offered to the intermediate risk fetuses. And then there are two countries, Belgium and the Netherlands, where the national offer is an IPT for all. And let's have a look at what is the participation of women in this still a relatively new test. We can see that in the majority of countries, less than 25% of women use an IPT. Then there are Spain and Italy and Austria, where in between 25% and 50% use it. And this includes also the Netherlands, where in spite of a national offer, about 50% of the women embark in this new test. Exception is Belgium, where more than 75% of women do the test. If we look at the combined test era, we had at that time the combined test, and the combined test has been validated by this prospective study of more than 100,000 pregnancies with 870 cases of trisomy, of common trisomies and other aneuploidies. And we can see that the risk cutoff of 1 in 100 had a false positive rate of 4%, and the detection rate for trisomies was 90% for trisomy 21, 97% for trisomy 18, and 92% for trisomy 13. So not too bad, even with the combined test. I would say that the detection rate resembles that of an IPT. Regarding anatomical screening, obviously during the combined test we were also looking at the fetus to measure the nuchal translucency, and this provided us with the opportunity of observing major defect. These were found in about 1% of all the cases, and they could be subdivided in 3 groups. A group of defects that are always detected already in the first trimester, because obviously this 1% refers to the whole pregnancy, 40% that were sometimes detected, and 30% that are undetectable in the first trimester because they are late onset. This is a more recent paper from the group of Kings, again by Argyros-Ingelaki. And we can see that in these 100,000 pregnancies that were screened by the combined test, again, there was a group of anomalies that were always detected in the first trimester: acrania, holoprosencephaly, body stalk anomaly, pulmonary or tricuspid atresia, abdominal wall defects. And then a group that were mostly detected: spina bifida, skeletal lethal arthrogryposis, amputation of limbs, some complex heart anomalies and lower urinary tract obstruction. Others that were detected only occasionally, like posterior fossa anomaly or cleft of the lip and palate, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, cardiac anomalies, abdominal cyst, etc., etc. And again, others that were typically detected only later in pregnancy. And obviously, if we look at this slide, we realize that the challenge is to be able to operate the shift and to bring more and more condition from the occasionally and mostly to the always detectable in the first trimester. And in this systematic review of Karim, published in 2017, and then another one in 2021 concerning cardiac anomaly, we can see that the detection rate, and this was based on certain studies, on unselected population is about 32%. Whereas if we look at high-risk population or at studies where a systematic approach, a protocol was used, the detection rate doubled to 60%. The same applies for cardiac defects. in non-high risk population, the detection rate was higher because probably there was more attention, and the scans were done by highly experienced sonographers. So the detection rate was nearly 60%, but was much better in case high-risk population, and a systematic protocol was used. So the conclusion of this paper is that the use of standardized protocol increases the detection rate in high and low risk population. That's also what we demonstrated in our paper in 2018 and also other studies. And more than half of the congenital heart defects can be detected in the first trimester. Therefore, there is a need to develop international protocols with standard views to investigate effectively the first trimester fetus. And this is again the study of Singelaki. And you can see here some examples of the conditions that are detected. It is a complex anomaly with body stalk anomaly, luto. This is a case of hydrops. So sorry, I jumped too quickly. A kind of a case of eye drops with a very large nuclear translucency, and this is a very large omphalocele. We also, as I alluded to, performed a study in 2018, published, involving over 5,000 women, and we could detect of all the anomalies that were present until the 20 weeks, half of them already in the first trimester. So confirming that when you use a protocol, we can detect about 50% of the anomalies. Then we did another study where we looked at what happened after the introduction of NIPT and which were the trends in detection of anomalies when in the Netherlands, all of a sudden, a first trimester scan at 11 to 13 weeks was not performed anymore, because we had a dating scan before the NIPT, classically at about 10 weeks, and performed very quickly without any particular attention for the fetal anatomy, and then the 20-week scan. So we wanted to see what happened to our detection rate in this period after 2017, which was the year where NIPT was introduced in the Netherlands. So we classified the anomalies that we recovered in our database using Singelaki classification, always, sometimes, and never detectable. And we looked at the timing of detection of structural anomalies in this new era, and the number of anomalies that could have been potentially detected in the first trimester, but in actual fact were only detected in the second trimester. And we looked at the pregnancy outcome in terms of IUD, neonatal deaths, TOP, and live births. And as you can see here, we don't look at those very few pregnancies that had a first trimester anomaly scan because of various reasons, but we look at the 500 cases where no first trimester scan was performed. And we can see that the vast majority of anomalies was detected at the second trimester anomaly scan, and 54 were detected at the dating ultrasound. So if we look at the anomalies that were detected at the dating ultrasound scan, 54% belonged to the always detectable, 4% to the sometimes detectable, and 42% were other transient findings, like, for instance, increased nuchal, etc. TOP was performed in 67% of the cases at a mean gestational age of 15 weeks, and in 5% of the cases there was a IUD. If we now look at the group of the 480 that were anomalies that were detected at the 20-week scan, 8% belong to those that could always be detectable in the first trimester, 63% to those that could be sometimes detectable in the first trimester, and only 26% to those that are never detectable in the first trimester. Meaning that this group of the 8% plus 63% could have possibly be detected in the first trimester if a first trimester scan had been present. Interestingly, the TOP rate was much lower in this group than in the other, at a mean gestational age of 22 weeks, and there were 5% IUDs and 4% on neonatal deaths. So there was a significant difference in the rate of TOP and time from diagnosis, whereas time from diagnosis to TOP was non-significant. So the conclusion of this study is that over 60% of the anomalies detected at the 20-week scan could have potentially been detected at a late first trimester scan had this been offered. And the fact that in the cell-free fetal DNA era, we shouldn't forget to perform a first trimester ultrasound is also underlined by the International Society of Prenatal Diagnosis consensus statement, which says that regarding first trimester ultrasound, at least one early first trimester scan for dating should be performed, and people who have an IPT as a primary screen should still be offered a 11 to 13 weeks ultrasound, obviously where local resources that permit. And obviously when a fetus has an ultrasound abnormality, including a NT measurement of more than 3.5 millimeters, invasive procedure for a more complete genetic workup should be offered instead of an IPT. ESOG has also recently reviewed the practice guideline for the performance of a first trimester scan, with as a main goal to provide accurate information that will facilitate the delivery of optimized antenatal care. And whereas the early scan in the first trimester is used to confirm viability, establish gestational age, and determine the number of fetus, assess chorionicity and amnionicity multiples, the late first trimester scan has as the main goal the detection of gross anomalies. As we realized while publishing and writing this guideline, that not in all jurisdictions there are the same possibilities and financial resources, we decided to propose two different models. A model of global assessment, basic assessment of the fetal anatomy that should really be offered in every single country, even if there is not the possibility of offering an advanced investigation. And as you can see here, there are some elements. These are the anatomical region, so head and brain, neck, heart, abdomen, extremities, placenta, and biometry that should be measured and observed at least in a minimal fashion. Next to this, there is obviously the possibility there where there are the resources of extending this basic examination to an advanced examination, where, for instance, in the head and the brain, we will also look at the black ones are the basic one, at the thalami, at the brainstem, at the cerebral peduncles with the aqueduct of Sylvius, and the intracranial translucency at the cisterna magna, and in the face and neck at the orbits, the maxilla, retronasal triangle, upper lip, mandible, and at the thorax, at the diaphragmatic continuity. And here we can see an illustration, for instance, for the examination of the brain, of the different structures that you can include in your advanced examination. Regarding the heart, we added to the basic examination the position of the heart, the 4-chamber view with 2 distinct ventricles on grayscale and a color Doppler in diastole, the left outflow on grayscale and a color Doppler, the 3-vessel and trachea view on grayscale and color Doppler, the absence of tricuspid regurgitation and antegrade flow in the ductus venosus A wave on Doppler investigation. And you can see here all the adds-on that we proposed in red. And so here we see also for the heart, the advanced examination with color Doppler includes the filling of the ventricles, the outflow tract, the V sign, and etc., etc. So the colleague that will speak after me, Oliver Kagan, has published this very interesting paper illustrating 10 good reasons why we should carry on an anomaly scan in the NIPT era. And well, I will not name them all, but I will focus on some of them. Well, for instance, it's very important to realize that in obese women, this could be the best fetal examination that we can perform, because we know that do a thorough anatomy scan at 20 weeks in obese women could be extremely challenging, whereas a transvaginal first trimester scan can provide very good views. And we know that early diagnosis allows more time for the genetic workup, that women prefer it, that the risk of termination of pregnancies are less, and I'm sure that Oliver will talk about this, and also the psychological consequences of late termination are much larger than when a termination is performed at an earlier stage. And also we can detect early dichorionic twin pregnancies with major defect, which also facilitates the management. Well, one of the reasons is that there is a lot of focus on these genetic tests, but in actual fact, if we really look at what are the problems we are faced with during pregnancy, well, fortunately, 95% of the pregnancies are normal and defects occur only in 5%. But if we focus on these 5%, we see that the majority of defects are structural defects. Congenital heart defects, 20%, non-cardiac defects, 42%, and the rest are genetic defects, of which 20% are copy number variants, those defects that you can only pick up with the array CGH. And if we look at the coverage of the NIPT, which deals especially with trisomies, this is about 11%, not more than that. So it is really important that when we think of what tests we offer to women in the first trimester, we also think of what we want to look for and what is the prevalence of the condition we want to look for. One of these conditions is the increased nuchal translucency. And obviously the question has been, now in the NIPT era, if we do NIPT, is it still important to measure the nuchal translucency? Well, we also looked at what is the yield of a nuchal translucency screening apart from the classical trisomies. And as you can see, we collected altogether in the Netherlands 1,900 cases. We had 771 cases with a normal karyotype when we were still performing the QF-PCR or the karyotype. And half of them had chromosomal microarray offered. And as you can see in this chromosomally normal group, there were still 2% of gene disorders, 2 single gene disorders, 2% of abnormal RACGH, And there were also some isolated anomaly, 9.3%, meaning that in this group, the only alarm signal have been the increased nuchal translucency. Therefore, an increased nuchal translucency is still important because it calls for a more advanced investigation than NIPT. So here we, again, we focus on this group, and what I want also to mention is of these single gene disorders, there were 38, 50% were rasopathies, those conditions that belong to the Noonan spectrum, and that, as we know, are single gene disorders that can only be detected with a specific Noonan panel. So we are already moving into the area of the exome sequencing. And we know that this kind of investigation will be more and more performed in the future, exome sequencing and maybe even whole genome sequencing. And the guiding element will be the presence of an abnormal phenotype of abnormalities within the fetus. A recently published paper has been very encouraging regarding the cost effectiveness of an ultrasound before non-invasive prenatal screening, and has described that the strategy involving ultrasound before cell-free fetal DNA was more costly because obviously we do two tests, we do ultrasound and then cell-free fetal DNA, but was also more cost-effective compared to when we offer cell-free fetal DNA alone. More recently, there has always been also been interest for the fact that even the ultrasound that we do preceding the cell-free fetal DNA, and maybe in the majority of cases at the moment is still a very early ultrasound at about 11, 10 weeks, if it's a little bit, let's say, advanced, can change the management in about 10% of the cases, because either we should correct the gestational age, or there has been a miscarriage, or a demised twin, or fetal edema, or we have found a major structural anomaly, and then we will not do an IPT in that pregnancy, but offer a more advanced genetic test. Oliver and me, together with Francesca Bardi, wrote this opinion paper on the special issue of prenatal diagnosis that was published in coincidence with the recent Edinburgh meeting. And we described the different first trimester screening strategy with a focus on a balance between cost, efficiency, and diagnostic yield. We know that there are many roads leading to Rome, so there is no one single flavor. Everyone can choose for a different flavor, but it's very important that some basic principles are respected. I warmly invite you to read this paper, and the possible first trimester strategies, excluding there where the first trimester, that the combined test is still in place and NIPT is offered as a second tier, are NIPT first at about 11 weeks after a quick dating scan, and then an anatomy scan at 13 and 20 weeks. And the other one is first start with the scan at 12 to 13 weeks for dating, anatomy survey, and also to be used, for instance, to measure the uterine artery, if we want also to screen for preeclampsia, followed by an IPT at 12 to 13 weeks. In this second case, you will have had the exclusion of all the cases with increased nuchal, with a structural anomaly, with a demised pregnancy, and therefore it could be more cost effective, as also showed by the the study of Batelier. The conclusion of my talk is that we have new tools, and it's very important that we use these new tools wisely and not throw away completely the first trimester scan and replace it with a test which gives us very important and accurate information, but it doesn't say anything about the anatomy. So it's very important that before abandoning previous screening strategy, we should also consider the collateral benefits and look at first trimester screening in a holistic way. And I thank you very much for your attention.